just a little bit about me and the book, The Mind Body Stress Reset. I came to research self-regulation and somatic self-regulation through my own very real and very debilitating crisis. I experienced such dysregulation in the middle of my adulthood, in my early 40s, that I didn't know where to turn. I had spent much of my mid-20s and mid-30s, about 15 years, using the tools of yoga and mindfulness, healthy eating, walks in nature, the basics for a lot of folks. And those practices, those tools, those self-care approaches had been enough to what I now understand was to get by, was to be regulated enough to show up and do my days and get through most stress events using those tools to help my regulation. But when my stress level increased dramatically through a perfect storm of events, there's really no one thing to point at, but it was certainly the taxing experience of new motherhood, my own resurfacing of developmental traumatic memories that can come for mothers, parents, when the young child comes into our life for the first time. And the extreme stress on the nervous system with what is required to take care of other beings, as well as a really difficult work environment that I found myself in during those first few years of motherhood that was re-traumatizing in so many ways, and a very intense dive into narrative exploration of my history, or kind of deep talking, deep narrative therapy that ended up exposing my mind and body to too many memories too quickly, too intensely. And with all of those things happening simultaneously, my nervous system couldn't regulate. I couldn't use the tools that were familiar to me to find my way back to even getting by, even okay enough. And I was in a state of dysregulation most of the time. Sometimes it was slightly less dysregulated, as we say, and sometimes it was extremely more dysregulated, but much of the time I was in a state of a stress reaction, if you were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very regulated, no stress reaction, and 10 being extraordinary stress reaction. I was living at a 6.5, 7, 8, 9 much of the time. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I really didn't know, and it was scary. I was exploring and looking under every rock I could find, going to every practitioner I could, listening to anyone that would tell me about anything they'd tried that had helped. And when I went to see a somatic experiencing practitioner, my body immediately, and of course that was just a slight shift, but little by little began to feel states of regulation, or maybe at that point it was really just slightly less dysregulation than it had in a long time. And over the course of several years of being a client and gaining more and more regulation, I knew I needed to study this further. I entered graduate school in mind-body medicine and began to look more deeply into the science behind our regulatory systems, how they work, how they help, what doesn't work and why, what does work and why. And I'll be discussing some of the why during our courses together. But if you're interested in more of the science and explanation behind these skills that will be feeling together, I encourage you to look at the Mind Body Stress Reset book. There are so many studies cited and so much information there for you to access that I won't be covering in great detail during our courses. These are really times for us to experience, to live into the tools and feel them. So I studied in graduate school how and why and what helps the nervous system regulate. And then I walked into my first somatic experiencing training, and everything that my teachers were saying was making sense to me. And it was falling into place in a way that was so relieving and felt so important and had felt so far away before that time. For me, learning the tools, learning the science, learning the approach of somatic experiencing was returning to myself and returning to states of well-being and safety that I hadn't been in touch with in years and years, and probably in some cases ever. So I am incredibly grateful to these teachings. Incredibly glad that I found myself in those rooms, and it felt so important to me that the information be put out there again. I know it's already out there, but I wanted to give a voice that was a woman's voice, a younger person's voice. The book is quite humorous. I wanted to bring a lighthearted approach to it. And most importantly, it's absolutely written for the general public. I wanted to talk to people who had been where I was, living my days in such dysregulation and not knowing why. I wanted to talk to those folks that hadn't heard of this, that weren't already therapists of one kind or another, helpers of one kind or another, but were just folks, just people suffering. And so I sat down to convert my 200-page, very academic, very dry thesis into a self-help book that anybody hopefully could pick up and feel connected to, and anyone could gain some tools that could be used for themselves, or as I say, self-administered. And that's what gave rise to the book. That's what gave rise to the way it's written and how I frame the tools. For me, it was really important to write something that left the reader with things they could do for themselves in addition to their therapy, if they're fortunate enough, have the resources to and the access to therapy, but also for folks that don't have those resources, for folks that can't get to, or maybe even aren't regulated enough in relationship with others to work with others yet. So this book can be something that's used for your clients between sessions. It can be used for folks that can't ever get to therapy. And it can also be used by folks that are hoping to get to therapy, but actually need a little more personal experience of safe enough, of okay enough in their body, mind, system before they walk into any therapy rooms or even meet online in any therapy Zoom space or other space. So that's how I came to this work and research. And that's why I put pen to paper and wrote it down. The last thing I'll mention is that in graduate school, I wanted to not just hypothesize about the ability of folks to self-administer these tools and find relief, but I wanted to study it and see what the results could be. So I collected samples from a study group of saliva to look for salivary cortisol before a 6-week course and after a 6-week course. and their salivary cortisol levels dropped significantly. It found to be 95% effective in reducing cortisol levels for participants. And the cortisol was collected at the same time of day from the same group of people on day 1 before the course, and same time of day from the same group of people on day 6 after self-regulatory tools had been practiced together. So they also shared self-report measures, and each person shared that they felt different, that they were recognizing different thoughts occurring for them, different images occurring for them, different bodily sensations occurring for them. And it was really hopeful to read that their description of their experience, so their cognitive awareness and somatic awareness of their stress level, anxiety level, dysregulation was improving after the tools that they would again do with themselves on their own between 5 1-hour classes that we had, 1.5-hour classes that we had together. And their physiology changed. That's what's represented by the change in cortisol. Their physical stress level changed as a result of them doing these practices for a few minutes a week over the course of a few weeks. And we know as practitioners that our clients' physiology absolutely changes over the course of our time working with them. And I think we know as humans that work with these somatic tools ourselves, that are somatic therapy recipients ourselves, that our bodies have changed as a result of these practices. But we can also know that folks can do these practices on their own and feel that change in addition to their work with us and feel that change. All of those different options for people to find some access to well-being, some access to okayness, some relationship to being safe enough in their body, in their mind, and in their heart.